Welcome, everyone. I am Randi Albertsen. I own Innovations in Education LLC. We do training and consulting for childcare programs. And you are currently in the session called I Am Colorblind, but Are You Really? So today, what we're going to be doing is exploring the concept of what it means to be colorblind. What does that mean for you in the classroom? How does that impact how you work with the children and families that you serve? And are you really colorblind? And is that what you want to be? So, just like when you are in a face-to-face workshop, when you are taking a training virtually, you should have a piece of paper and something to write with. You should also have had an opportunity to download the handouts for this session. There are 3 handouts that you should have access to. So let's take a moment now for everyone to grab something to write with and download the handout. All right, welcome back. Your first handout that you are going to need says, I am colorblind, but are you really, at the top? And it just looks like an empty table that's an opportunity for you to take notes. What I have done is kind of taken sections of this workshop and outline them for you so you can take notes and follow along. So what you should see right now is a question on the screen that says, what do you think? I don't think of the children in my program in terms of their race or ethnicity. I am colorblind when it comes to my teaching. So somewhere on your notes page, just write down how well you agree or disagree with this statement, with 1 being agree strongly and 5 being disagree strongly. We're going to come back to this statement a little bit later in our session. Now what I'd like you to do, on the handout that says I am colorblind, but are you really? I want you to quickly write down the names of 5 people you know, living or dead, that you're familiar with for each category. So you can see these categories line up on your notes page: author, artist, musician, and politician. So we're going to take a pause for you to write down 5 people you know in each of those categories. Great. So now that you've had a chance to write down who you know, again, living or dead, in each of these 4 categories, one of the things to think about in the names on your page is, are these people that are similar to you, or are these people who are different from you? And what I mean by that is, we are often more comfortable with similarities and know more about people that we've been exposed to than people who are different from us. Much of our comfort level is based on when and where we grew up, as well as other personal influences, such as your parents, the schools you went to, churches, and of course, a huge influence is the media. So another question that I have for you is, did race, ethnicity, or country of origin play a role in your choices? On the screen, you should see A for yes, B for no, and C for unsure. Again, just jot that down. Did race, ethnicity, or country of origin play a role in the names that you wrote down on your page? As you're looking at these names under each of these categories, I'd like you to put an asterisk next to the names of the 5 people who represent someone from your own ethnic or racial group or country in which they were born. Someone who represents who you are, your ethnicity, your racial group, or the country where you were born. As you look at this list, what do you notice? Do you see some similarities in the names that you've written down? Do you see representation of an author, an artist, a musician, or a politician who shares the same race as you, or shares the same ethnicity or country of origin? This is really what we're talking about when we think who is similar to us and who is not. Who do we know in our sphere of influence that's going to help us relate better and have more meaning? Again, we tend to choose books by authors who have a similar background to us. We tend to like artists and musicians who have a similar background. We tend to vote for politicians who have a similar background, whether that be their race, ethnicity, or country of origin. So as you look at your list, how many of those choices were actually influenced by race, ethnicity, or country of origin? 1 to 5 people? 6 to 10 on your list? 11 to 15? 16 to 20 of those names similar in background to you? Or none? Jot down those numbers, and we will come back to this a little bit later on. When you hear the word diversity, what are some things that you think of? Take a moment and on your handout in the box that says diversity, jot down some words or phrases that come to mind when you hear the word diversity. There are so many buzzwords floating around when you hear that word diversity. I'd like to start with some definitions so we're all referring to the same thing. Diversity is the word that's tied to accreditation, it's tied to excels, it's tied to almost every quality initiative in early childhood education, whether you're doing MSDE accreditation or NAEYC accreditation or NECPA accreditation. All of those quality initiatives incorporate diversity in some way, shape, or form. So what is diversity? Diversity is the practice or quality of including or involving people from a range of different social and ethnic backgrounds and of different genders and sexual orientations. I'm going to repeat that one more time. Diversity is the practice or quality of including or involving people from a range of different social and ethnic backgrounds and of different genders and sexual orientations. You can find a variety of definitions for diversity depending on where you look. But for what we are going to be talking about today, we're focused mainly on social and ethnic backgrounds, gender and sexual orientation. So why is diversity important? What does it have to do with culture? And what does it have to do with being colorblind? Culture is defined as the shared patterns of behaviors and interactions, the way we think and the way we feel and understand that are learned through a process of socialization. These shared patterns identify the members of a culture group while also distinguishing those of a different culture group. Let's review that again. Culture is defined as the shared patterns of behaviors and interactions, the way we think and the way we feel and understand that are learned through a process of socialization. So what that means is all of the interactions we have, the relationships we have with other people, the way that we interact with our family, our siblings, our parents, our cousins, our aunts and uncles, the way we interact with our teachers at school, with our community, with the people at Starbucks. All of those patterns of behaviors and interactions influence how we think, how we feel, and how we understand the world around us. And these patterns of behaviors become ingrained in who we are and what we do. This is what defines our culture. So when we talk about culture, there are a number of different elements of culture. We're not going to get into the details of every single element of culture in this workshop, but it's important to be aware of what are the constructs that create our culture. So the first one that is the most visible is race. We also have gender. We have abilities and disabilities. Our age, whether we're young, whether we're old, whether a teenager or in college. Our sexuality, including sexual orientation. Our social class is an element of culture. Our beliefs about religion or our spiritual practices are an element of culture. Our family's original geographic location is an element of culture. And the language we speak is an element of culture. All of these elements of culture influence how we interact with each other and how we build relationships. And each of these elements of culture are unique to each and every one of us. Even if you grew up in the same neighborhood, you still have individual differences in elements of culture that influence and shape your experiences. For example, I'm Jewish. That's my religion. I grew up in a mostly Jewish neighborhood, but in Judaism, there are a variety of beliefs and practices. And so even though many of my friends were Jewish, each of us practiced different traditions and customs within our own homes. And those beliefs and practices are what creates that uniqueness in how each and every one of us experiences and expresses culture. There are certain things that are common to everyone who I know who is Jewish. For example, religion, being Jewish, is passed down through the mother. So regardless of what religion my father practiced, because my mother is Jewish, according to Judaism, that makes me Jewish. That is a standard practice across Judaism. But within Judaism, we practice at different levels. I have friends who go to synagogue on Friday nights and Saturday mornings, and they read from our Torah on a regular basis. My family did not practice that way. While we went to services, it was not a weekly event in our house. So even though my next door neighbor was Jewish, the way that we practice our religion creates those differences in culture. That's what shapes our perspective. I'm also a woman. Being female creates some common similarities with every other female on this earth. Right? We all experience a menstrual period, whether we want to or not. We all share physical characteristics that set us apart from men. Being a woman creates similarities in our experiences. It creates opportunities for discrimination because we are women. There are commonalities just for being female, but that does not mean that every female shares the same culture. Culture, again, is influenced on how you are raised. There are cultures who believe that women should be at home having babies and cooking in the kitchen. And there are cultures who believe that women should be out going to school and getting a job or just going out into the workplace. So other elements of culture, your age, your parents' age, so the generation in which you grew up, your geographic location of origin, your ethnicity, abilities and disabilities are going to influence messages you receive about being a woman. So within each of these elements of culture, even though we share similarities, we also share differences. It's the combination of these elements of culture that work together to create these individual experiences. Within each of our individual cultures, there are 3 levels of culture. Those 3 levels are surface, shallow, and deep. Your surface culture is kind of a low emotional charge to it. Things that are very visible on the surface. Things that people can see, the things that you do, things that you say, things like holidays, games, familiar stories, the way that you talk make up your surface culture. Shallow culture is more about unspoken rules. Unspoken rules that shape, again, who you are in your culture. Unspoken rules such as how much personal space you need. Do you make eye contact when you talk to someone? Your concept of time. If you have friends who are Jewish, you'll know that we talk about Jewish time, which usually means we're at least 5 to 10 minutes late for everything. The third level of culture is deep culture. This is what you can't see. It's what you feel. Deep culture is related to unconscious assumptions and experiences that we have about how we should behave and interact with other people, how we should feel, and how we should respond emotionally. Deep culture really reflects your definition of family. It reflects how you make decisions. It reflects your notion of fairness, and it reflects your beliefs in individualism or collectivism. Individualism is very common in Western culture. Every man for himself. I'm going to pull myself up by my bootstraps. I'm going to do this all on my own. That's individualism. Collectivism means that it takes a village to raise a child. We are all in this together. With teamwork, we can figure this out. That's part of your deep culture. Those are the kinds of things that influence how you interact with other people. It influences how you respond to other people. What I'd like you to do right now is take a look at the handout that's titled 3 Levels of Culture, Self-Reflection. On this handout, you should see 3 boxes. The first box is surface level, the second box is shallow level, and the third box is deep level. Each of these boxes asks questions of you, questions for you to think about, so that you can do a self-reflection on your own personal culture. We're going to take a pause so you have a few moments to answer the questions within each of these boxes. And when we come back, we're going to talk a little more about what it means to acknowledge and experience each of these levels of culture. Welcome back. One of your handouts has an image of a tree, and at the top it says 3 levels of culture. This image of a tree demonstrates the surface, shallow, and deep culture. It is a resource from Zaretta Hammond's Culturally Responsive Teaching and the Brain. Dr. Hammond refers to these 3 levels of culture as cultural archetypes. While cultures may differ at the surface and shallow levels, at the root of different cultures are these common values, worldviews, and practices that form these archetypes. Our culture is what influences our values and beliefs. It influences our experiences and how we build relationships. Now that you've had a chance to look at the 3 levels of culture and do a self-reflection, I'd like to give you some examples from my personal culture, just to get a sense of who I am and how culture has influenced me. On the surface level, when I was growing up, we played kickball in the street. We played running bases in the backyard or in a field behind one of my neighbor's houses. We were outside all day long and told not to come home until the streetlights came on. When we celebrate holidays, food, any food, is a huge part of our family gatherings. Food was often more important than the holiday or the celebration itself. Growing up as a Jewish American child in Maryland, we had special foods that we eat on almost every Jewish holiday. Okay, go ahead. One of the foods that we serve at almost every Jewish holiday is gefilte fish, which is kind of a made-up fish. I don't even want to know how it's made, but it is one of the foods that is served at every Jewish holiday. And if you grow up eating gefilte fish, it's a mild white fish, by the way. If you grow up eating gefilte fish, you see nothing strange or different about it. But if you are coming into visit or have a holiday meal with my family and you've never had gefilte fish before, I'm sure you've never heard of gefilte fish. And you might be thinking, what is this? And I don't think I'm going to try it. But that is part of our surface family traditions. At the shallow level, my family, while we express emotions, my father is not very tolerant of tears. So I learned that if I was upset about something, that I should be waiting till he's gone and I could cry to my mother, or I go in my room and have a good cry and then move on. As far as personal space and touching, my mother is very warm and very friendly, will give everyone she knows a hug and a kiss. And then my dad is a little awkward with the hugs and the kisses. common sayings or words of wisdom from my family, my father shines with this one. My father's most famous line is, "There's always room for ice cream. It just slides right down." After every meal, whether we're at home, we're at a restaurant, and someone brings up, "Anyone want dessert?" my father always responds with, "There's always room for ice cream. It just slides right down." My children know that saying very well. As for deep level of culture, I've already shared with you a little about my religious and spiritual beliefs, how we define fairness. Well, my father is an attorney, and so growing up, looking through the lens of justice and what is right versus what is wrong, and applying concepts of fairness to each and every person and each and every situation was something that we discussed often in my house. My mother, not a fan of animals. My father loved animals. We had dogs growing up, but my mother was never quite a fan. So at the first opportunity to not have a pet, we didn't. And now, of course, I have 3 dogs and a cat. As far as completing tasks independently or with a group, my family is very individualist. You work hard, you do things on your own, you find your own way to accomplish the task. So now that you've got a glimpse into my personal levels of culture, take a look at what you've noted on your own papers, on your own reflections. And I ask, can you separate yourself from your culture? Can your children separate themselves from their culture? Have you shared with your children the culture and experiences that you had when you were growing up? When we think about the influence of culture, it's important to recognize how pervasive culture is in terms of our everyday activities, our everyday life. Culture influences your relationships. It influences relationships by making a difference in who you choose to spend time with. It influences who you are comfortable with. Culture influences how you relate to other people. Do you want to have long conversations, or would you rather go and do an activity? In building relationships, your culture, what you learned about trust and intimacy, is going to influence every relationship that you have with your children, with your parents, with your siblings, with your friends, with your love interest. Culture influences your choices. What did your family perceive to be a good choice, a bad choice? That's going to influence the choices you make in your daily life. Culture influences where you shop. What neighborhoods will you go to do your shopping? Are you going to shop at the mall? Or are you going to shop at a small boutique store where you might know the shop owner? Or are you going to shop at a big box store where everything is the same? Or are you going to shop at a store that sells items or products that reflect who you are, your culture, and what you believe? Culture influences how you dress. Is that shirt a little too revealing? Are your pants a little too baggy? What shoes are you going to wear? Culture influences what you eat. The foods you grew up with, chances are the foods that had a big impression on you and have influenced your taste. If you were only exposed to gefilte fish, you might not know that that's not really a real fish. And there are other types of fish that you could enjoy. One thing to keep in mind when we talk about culture is that it's important to be authentic in how you represent culture in your program and your classrooms. Going back to what I mentioned earlier about diversity, diversity is reflected in every early childhood initiative out there. And almost all of the documents related to diversity will talk about cultural representation in your classroom. We're going to explore classroom materials and environments as we move through this presentation. But I'd like to take a moment and talk about implicit bias. Implicit bias is an unconscious bias or prejudice that we have, or an assumption that we make about another person based on common cultural stereotypes rather than thoughtful judgment. Everyone, and I mean everyone, has implicit bias in some way. Think about how the media programs our minds. The images that you see in the world around you, the images you see on the daily news, that you see in magazine advertisements, that you see on billboards, in movies, on TV shows. When you hear the word peanut butter, what do you think of? Did jelly come to mind? Right? We make an association. When we hear peanut butter, we automatically think jelly. How about when I say salt? What comes to mind? Did you think pepper? Because we tend to associate salt and pepper together. This is how implicit bias works. It is the messages and the images and the associations that we see every day all around us. If you turn on the news and you constantly hear, "This is a bad neighborhood," or "those people are bad," it creates an unconscious association. Whether or not that information is true, the constant bombardment of words like bad and neighborhood or bad and people are what creates that unconscious association. The media continually surrounds us with images and messages like this. Many of those messages are designed to create emotions within us, create responses and feelings. And oftentimes, it's hard to tease out what's fact versus what's fiction. While as individuals, we may not be outwardly biased, these images surround our subconscious and influence us in subtle ways. At this point in our session, I'm sure you've been sitting for a while, and as early childhood educators, we're not used to doing that kind of sitting. Let's take a break, 3 minutes, and what I would like for you to do is take out your phone. I know you're in class, you're not supposed to have your phone out. Take out your phone and look around your environment. Find 2 things that when you see them create an association, just like peanut butter and jelly or salt and pepper. Take a photo of those 2 items. Hold on to your photos, because after the session, I would like for you to post your photos to the social wall on the Crowd Compass app. I'm going to be looking for your pictures later today, and I'm going to draw 3 winners for your photo associations. Your prize is gefilte fish. Just kidding. I'm going to give away some children's books to 3 people that have posted on the social wall. Since this is being recorded and some of you may be watching the replay, I will wait until Sunday to pull those names. It's important to recognize that we all have implicit bias. there are things we can do to minimize the effects of these biases in our classrooms. The first thing is awareness. Just being aware and knowing that every one of us has implicit bias is the first step in acknowledging and recognizing those differences and culture. The second thing you can do is to take a good look at your environment and the materials you have in your classroom. You're going to look at books, posters, block people, images that you might have anywhere in the classroom or hallways, costumes in your dress-up, housekeeping, dramatic play area, any kind of materials that you are using with your children. You want to make sure that those materials are not perpetuating stereotypes. If you happen to serve a population of children and families that's homogeneous, it's even more important to include authentic representations of other cultures in your programs, as those children and families, once they leave your program, are going to be exposed to a variety of cultures and different people in the larger world. Take a look at the image on this slide. Do you have any of these costumes in your program, or costumes that look similar to this? These are very popular dramatic play dress-up clothes. It's easy to purchase them in any school supply catalog. But have you ever stopped to think about the message that these costumes are sending? When you open the school supply catalog and you choose the section on diversity, these are some of the props and materials that show up. You think you're making a good choice because you've gone to the diversity section and you've chosen an item that the school supply company deems as reflective of culture and diversity. But let's really take a minute to think about what these images represent. Look at those costumes. Look at the illustrations in photos and books. Look at the posters on your walls, or the food that you have in your dramatic play area, or even the foods that you serve at snack and lunch. What messages are the children receiving? What words do you use to describe these images? When you look at these photos, just looking at the picture on the slide, do you tell your children that these are the clothes that children in Africa wear, that they wear kente cloths? Do you tell your children that this is what Native Americans wear? When you look at the posters on the walls and you see a child from Germany, do you say, Germans wear lederhosen and the Japanese wear kimonos? Do you separate out traditional dress or clothing for special occasions from clothing that's worn every day? My guess is that the conversations you have with children are more along the lines of, this is where this article of clothing is from. A sombrero is from Mexico. But for many children, they have no concept of what that means. If they've never been to Mexico, they have no idea where it is, even if you show them on a map or a globe. If you were to travel to Germany, would you anticipate seeing people in lederhosen? Would you anticipate seeing people wearing sombreros if you were to visit Mexico? Often, when we try to decorate our classroom spaces, we're told to include diversity in the images we put on the walls. We're expected to know what materials or images to choose, but no one really gives us any guidance. Take, for instance, this typical poster you can easily purchase through any number of school supply catalogs. What I see on this poster is a person from the United Kingdom in a top hat and clothing that you would see outside of the royal palace. But do you think everyone in the United Kingdom is dressed that way? Do you think everyone from France wears a beret? And what about the girl in the hula skirt? Where do you think she's from? Hawaii? Fiji? Polynesian Islands? These images are what creates stereotypes. We associate the visual image of these items of clothing, whether it's something that's worn on a holiday or special occasion, whether it's considered traditional dress for special ceremonies. This is what creates stereotypes. This is what we want to avoid. We do not want to create the association that everyone from Mexico wears a sombrero. We do not want to create the association that all people from Africa wear kente cloths. One of my favorite images from a few years ago was a bulletin board border that I had purchased for my classroom, and it showed an American girl from the United States, supposedly, and a boy wearing a Stetson hat, chaps, a bandana, and cowboy boots. All right, if you know me, you know I do wear cowboy boots, but I don't think you've ever seen me in a Stetson hat, wearing a bandana, or wearing chaps. And quite honestly, how many of you have chaps at home? This is how stereotypes develop. We see an image and we create an association. This is what influences implicit bias. Some of you may have posters with photographs and images that reflect different countries. I was recently in a classroom where there were posters on the wall from China, from Africa, from the United Kingdom, from Germany, from Mexico, from Italy. And each of these posters had beautiful images. The images reflected elements of culture from each of those countries. From India, there was a bowl of curry, amongst other images. The Taj Mahal was one of the images. In France, there was a picture of the Eiffel Tower, and there were buildings from the United States. Was the Golden Gate Bridge. It was the Empire State Building, kind of iconic buildings that you would be familiar with. In China, the building was a pagoda. These images, while they are reflective of those countries, again, create the same stereotypes and same biased associations as the costumes and the native dress, as same as the sombrero and the beret and the kente cloth. If your program has invested in these posters because you're going to study children around the world, I have a suggestion. First of all, young children are really not cognizant of what it means to travel around the world. You can show them a globe, you can show them a map, you can show them the pictures and images, but when it comes to understanding where is China, where is India, where is Africa, where is Italy, where is Mexico, where is the United States, that's truly beyond the scope of geographic knowledge for a young child. Having said that, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't be introducing cultural artifacts from other countries. You want to do it in a way that's respectful of the countries, but also helps children create more positive associations rather than negative stereotypes. One of the suggestions that I often give where I see these posters on the wall is to take that poster and, bear with me, nobody freak out, cut out each of those pictures and use the pictures on their own. If you are trying to create a classroom that welcomes diversity, that shows appreciation for other cultures, take those images and create books of similarities that you can then place in different areas in your classroom. For example, in the block corner, take all of those images of buildings, the Empire State Building, the Eiffel Tower, the Taj Mahal, the pagoda, whatever other buildings are reflected, the Leaning Tower of Pisa. Take images, the images of those buildings, and create a book. Label the name of the structure, Leaning Tower of Pisa, Eiffel Tower, pagoda, whatever it might be. You can also identify the country, but that's not as important as giving a name to the building, why it's important and why it's iconic. Put that book in your block area, your construction area. Use it as inspiration of buildings around the world so that as your children are exploring with blocks and those materials, they've got visual inspiration to help them. Those images of food that you can find on those same posters, the pretzel from Germany, the tea from the United Kingdom, the curry from India. Take those images and again, put them in a book that reflects food from around the world. Label the food items. I would venture a guess that many of your children have tried those foods. They may have never visited Mexico, but they may have had an enchilada. Use that as a teaching tool. Put that in your dramatic play or your housekeeping area. You can do the same thing with the images of people that are on those posters. Create another book, People Around the World. You don't even need to identify what country they're from. You're just showing people in all of their shades of color, in all of the items, different types of clothing that they wear. You can create a book of instruments or a book of animals, because the posters that you purchase through those school supply catalogs typically have a variety of iconic images reflective of a single country. That is segregating those icons and stereotyping them as reflective of only one place. If we want children to feel welcome, to feel that we respect and honor the culture and diversity they bring into the classroom, we need to be more open in how we reflect those images, how we show those images to children. So find a way to repurpose those posters. Find a way to talk about those costumes so that children understand, if you were to go visit Japan, chances are the people you see on the street are going to be wearing blue jeans and t-shirts just like you. A kimono is only worn during special occasions. It's important to make that distinction so children understand. If they go to visit Germany or Mexico, they're not going to see people in lederhosen or sombreros walking down the street. Most likely, those people will be wearing shorts or dresses or blue jeans or sweaters, just like you. So let's talk about what it means to be colorblind. There are many conversations, videos, TED Talks that you can find through Google or on YouTube about colorblindness and what that means and its impact on individuals. Basically, when you say you are colorblind, you are saying that you do not see the diversity, the color of skin, and the culture that a child brings into the classroom. Years ago, that was the predominant way of thinking in education, that we should be colorblind, that we should say that we see all children the same. But when we ignore race, culture, and all aspects of diversity, we are ignoring a huge part of each and every child and their family. I recently watched a quick video from a speaker who was talking about what it means to be colorblind. And one of the things he said that struck me was that the only thing in life that should be sorted by color is laundry. We've talked about culture and diversity, and the focus has mainly been on race and ethnicity. But it's important to note that these ideas apply to diversity of family structure, sexual orientation, gender identity, socioeconomics, language, and every other aspect of culture. when you are looking for materials and images and books for your classroom, you want to make sure that you are reflecting the cultures of the children and the families that you serve. When a family walks into your program for the very first time, will they see images that speak to them, that reflect back to them who they are? A single parent household, a family with 2 dads, a family that's adopted or fostering a child. Will they see images of a family where a parent, a grandparent, or a sibling is incarcerated? Look at the culture and diversity of each and every child and every family that walks into your program, and make sure you have materials that reflect who they are. These are things that you can talk about with your children. You can do role play. You can read stories. You can act things out in dramatic play. If you are struggling to find good quality materials or children's books that reflect diversity, please feel free to reach out to me. I would be happy to share children's book lists and resources and materials that I have found really are good at reflecting diversity and culture. When you are talking about diversity and culture and welcoming children and families to your programs, it's important to make sure that we're celebrating differences. We're talking about our commonalities, and we share what makes us human. Every culture has stories that they tell. Every culture has songs that they sing. Every culture has foods that they eat. What's become common in the world in which we live, a much more global world than that of 20, 30, or 50 years ago, is that the geographic boundaries of culture no longer keep us separated. Going back to the example of the foods that we eat. Do you drink tea? Or is tea only something you do at 4 p.m. high tea when you are in the United Kingdom? Do you eat enchiladas? Or is that only something they do in Mexico? If you know that you have embraced in your personal world elements of other cultures, you should be embracing those in your classroom as well. One last thought for you is the concept of equity and fairness in the classroom. When we talk about diversity and culture, we intentionally bring these elements into our programs. Sometimes there's a resistance or a backlash about changing the kinds of materials or images that we have always used, like the posters and the costumes that we talked about earlier. A few things to keep in mind. What we know and understand about how children learn has changed over time. What we know about equity and its impact on children and education has also evolved and changed over time. To quote Maya Angelou, when we know better, we do better. So understanding concepts of equity and fairness, people often say, well, we work in an equal society. If I'm colorblind, everyone gets the same. But when you look at the image of equality and everyone getting the same, what do you notice? Can all 3 children see the sporting event that's taking place? They believe that's soccer. Or does equality mean that we give everyone the same and it still doesn't matter if it's fair? Equity is what changes. Equity is what we rely on to make sure that each individual is getting their needs met. In order to see that soccer game, if we're being equitable, we make sure that everyone can see. Whether you can stand on the ground, you need 1 step, or you need 2 steps. We want our classrooms to be places of fairness. Fairness does not mean equal. Fairness means we are equitable. We need to start moving from a place of we've always done it this way and move into a place where our focus is on what do my children and families need to thrive. You know this when you're handling classroom management, challenging behaviors. There's always going to be a child that is demanding more of your attention or has behaviors that you might find more challenging, that need a little bit more support. You might have a child that needs more reminders to throw away their trash after lunch, to hang up their coat in their cubby. Do you not give them those reminders because you're not giving them to everyone else? No. You know that you want your children to be successful. So the child that might need a little more attention, that might need a little more of your time or a few more reminders, is going to get what they need because maybe you give them 5 reminders and the rest of your group only needs 1 or 2. Equity is making sure that each child gets what he or she needs to thrive. Recognizing children for who they are, what their heritage is, and how that walks into the classroom each and every day is more important now than ever before. So let's think back to the questions that I asked earlier in this session. When I asked you if to quickly jot down 5 people you know, living or dead, in each category: author, musician, artist, and politician. When thinking quickly, what came to mind? People who are similar to you or people who are different? Take a moment and revisit that list. And as you think about the 3 levels of culture, what's on the surface, what's shallow, and what's deeper, think about how we represent children's cultures. You may have heard the term tourist curriculum, where in December we celebrate all the holidays around the world. But do all the children in your class celebrate those holidays? And is that truly an authentic reflection of culture? When you say you're going to do studies of children around the world, and you go to China and Africa and India and United Kingdom and Mexico and Great Britain, the United States, wherever it is you might be traveling to, is that truly authentic, non-stereotypical way of representing culture? Or are you eating from the buffet? A little of this and a little of that, and creating that tourist curriculum. It's more important now than ever before, based on images we see on the news each and every day, that we are respectful in how we talk about and introduce culture and diversity in our classrooms. It's more important now, more than ever, to have materials and images that reflect non-stereotyped images of diversity and culture. When you did the self-reflection on your personal 3 levels of culture, I ask you, can you separate out your personal culture from who you are? Or is it ingrained into every strand of your being? If you bring your personal culture into the classroom with you, isn't it fair to say that your children and families do that as well? With that, I ask, are you colorblind, and should you be?